This Talking Flutes podcast is kindly sponsored by Trevor James Flutes, making life sound beautiful. You can show them some flute love by following them on Instagram at TJ Flutes, Trevor James Flutes on Facebook, and at trevorjamesflutes.com.
Hello, I'm Clare Southworth and you're listening to Talking Flutes. Now, by the time this episode comes out, we'll be into 2022. And whilst the thought of another year has been and gone is incredibly daunting, the wonderful thing about January is the sense of a fresh start. We think ahead to the new year, set ourselves goals, resolutions, and focus on what we want to achieve by the time 2023 comes along. Now, this year, we're running a series of episodes to celebrate this time of new beginnings. And what better way to think of goals for the year ahead than speaking to the one and only Elizabeth Walker, historical flute performer, teacher and author, who is today going to give her best tips for flute practice. So hello, Liz, again.
Hello, Claire.
So it's lovely to hear you and see you. We had such a wonderful chat a few months ago that I just had to ask you to come back and help kickstart our New Year, New You season and help us all with some ideas for flute practice by kickstarting our new section on flute tips called Food for Thought with Claire and Liz, which we talked about recently.
Fantastic.
So we're going to try and introduce our Food for Thought tips in a few episodes. But with this first one, I asked you the difficult task of thinking about 10 tips.
It was a difficult task.
It is a difficult task, isn't it? Do you want to start with your first one?
Yeah. So what I wanted to think about a little bit with, just 10 tips. I mean, it's quite hard to narrow it down, and it's quite hard not to be just talking about the same old thing. And yet I think I've probably come up with 10 ideas that are the same old thing, but I'm hoping to dress it up in a slightly different way so that we don't just switch off and go, oh, yeah, it's all about breathing, which inevitably it's going to be, isn't it? Because we're wind instruments. So I wanted to think about the term expressive use of air, because we need to use our air, but it's how we do that in a way that allows us to be the expressive people that we are. And I quite like it that Krantz also quite a lot talks about, expressive use of air, but he uses it with this analogy of thinking about a violin bow. So when he's talking about articulation, he's often talking about how a violinist might articulate that with a bow. And I quite like that idea of the violin bow because you can see it. We can't see our air. We can't see the air that we're bringing into our lungs. We can't see the air that we're expelling down into our flutes. So I quite like thinking about that visualization, if you like, of a violinist and how their bow speed changes. If you think of a full orchestra making this huge, great big sound, and you see all the violinists, arms going and their shoulders, and they're all, physically, they're really getting into it. And then, of course, just occasionally they play this beautiful, slow, meandering tune, and you can see that their bows are moving so slowly across the string. Now, I'm not a string player, never played a string instrument, so it's not about the technique of how they're using their bow. It's just really using that visualization to remind us that our speed of air changes. It changes obviously when we go into different octaves, but it could also change as we try and lean into the middle of the phrase, if you like, and we can think about just using that air in a faster way and responding to what happens when you put more air into the flute. I mean, clearly you have to do something with your lips. You have to respond to that amount of air that if you don't let the air out through a slightly bigger aperture, then there's no point in blowing a little bit harder. But it's that exploration of changing the speed of the air with what you need to change a little bit with the lips.
It's such great advice. I often used a string analogy, and I think for anyone listening, if you can do, what air guitar is, when you try and you tend to
yes.
play air guitar. So we used to do air violin. And
Oh,
if you're,
fantastic.
if you're thinking about even just things like an upbeat, like bom bom, and you think about how you might do that if you were a string player with doing air violin or air cello if you want, and you think about what length of bow would you use? Would it be an up bow? Would it be a down bow? How fast it would be? And it really helps you then link it into the way you use your breath as well. So it's a great way to think. And also, as you said, hugely important for thinking about articulation. If you want to have sort of keep the length in the articulation or make it shorter, how would you do it if you were bowing it? It makes us think a lot harder.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, lovely. I love the additional air violining. Brilliant.
Violining.
I should
Yes. Okay. All right. So lovely. A really good number one. What about number two?
Good. So number two, I was trying to think about, again, if I just say you've just got to repeat the bits that you can't do, that sounds a little bit dull. So I want to see if we can discover an exciting way of repeating bits that we really know that we can't play. We might have just skidded through. And we know that we've got to do them again, but we don't really want to just play it again and again. So really being creative about using that little tiny section that you know is tricky, and finding creative ways of repeating that phrase. So, we can dot it, we can lengthen one note, we can turn it backwards. I love my poor students. They do an awful lot of backward playing. I always think if you can turn it round backwards, then you're really going to know what the interval is or what the problem in the finger work. Often it's obviously it is a finger work thing, and there's no harm in doing it backwards.
Not at all. I like that. I like going backwards.
I like going backwards at the beginning of the new year might be a bit strange, but never mind.
So it's repetition, but changing the repetition, being creative with it.
Yes.
I have a definition for you, which links into this. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, which of course applies to flute practice. So repetition, but in a creative way and changing it.
And changing it.
Yeah, and changing it. Great. I like that one.
Good. Excellent. So that was repetition. That's number 2. So number 3, it's the breathing. I mean, it is interesting, isn't it? It doesn't matter how many people we introduce at Wells Cathedral School, where we have this wonderful program where we have masterclass series, and endless wonderful teachers a procession of wonderful teachers come in and teach my students. And it always comes back to breathing. And I always think, it's not as if I haven't mentioned it. So we do need creative ways of thinking about our breathing, different ways of thinking about our breathing. And so I wanted to sort of try and explore the idea that as you breathe, you just try and go deeper, broader. So what I mean by deeper and broader is wherever we're breathing from, just see if you can just expand it even more and go broad, as well as just filling your lungs downwards, if you like. We're going to try and just open everything as we go. So whatever breath I think that you're taking at the moment, see if you can go one bit deeper, one bit broader.
Yeah, that's good. I would say the only cautionary note I would say is be careful when you try and take a little bit more, is that you don't tighten up and your shoulders go up. I think the broad bit is really important. Think about your ribs expanding outwards.
Yep.
And it's interesting, I've just been to the gym this morning, and I was doing some interval training on the treadmill. And when you're really out of breath, you breathe so well, because you have to, your body sort of takes over. So sometimes if you go do a little bit of aerobic exercise, it can teach you a little bit about deeper breathing. So
fantastic.
It doesn't work for everyone, but it might work if you're listening. It might work for you. But breathing is obviously the way we play. If you don't breathe well, you don't play well. And we all need more air. We lose a lot of air when we play the flute. It's not like playing a reed instrument. So I like that word of depth. It makes you think deeper down into your tummy muscles.
Deeper down.
Yeah.
I like it when when you watch a really good singer, maybe they're in costume and they're singing a historical, maybe a Mozart opera, and and the singer comes on stage, and as they breathe, you can really feel them almost, lifting out of their costume, if you like. And it's sort of a visual thing, because sometimes we try and breathe more deeply, and the act of trying, as you say, you lift your shoulders, and sometimes your throat can even shut down as you're trying to breathe. So I think sometimes that effort of I know I must breathe deeper, so I'm just going to try a bit harder, doesn't result in a deeper breath. So I think if we can just sort of visualize, if you like, that sort of broadening of the shoulders, deepening of the chest. I was also exercising this morning, but in my Pilates class, and my Pilates teacher noticed that as I try and do my exercise, if you like, I tend to just a little bit clench in my knees. I don't know if anyone resonates with that. And she said, if you can just bend your knees, soften that lower part of your back. And so I was thinking about that in my flute practice this afternoon, just releasing the knees, just bending the knees a little bit. And suddenly I did find a broader, deeper breath. So, even after 40 odd years of flute practice, you can still maybe, find that extra depth just by doing something simple, by releasing your knees, because that also sort of slightly comes on to my next number 4, which was posture. So they are very, very interlinked, posture and being able to release this deeper breath, because obviously, if we cause any amount of tension in any part of our body, whether it be our shoulders, our knees, our necks, for me, I tend to clench my little toes. I often think, when you've got a newborn child and you want to put them in shoes, and the shop says, no, they can't go into shoes until they've stopped clenching their toes. I sometimes think, Claire, I wonder why and how I ever got to wear shoes, because I still clench my toes.
Well, that's interesting, because we all of us do have habits that because it's a habit, we don't realize that we do it. And I think in terms of posture, sometimes you can do quite a lot of work before you start playing the flute in order to make yourself a little bit aware of muscles and where there's tension, or where you could release tension. I mean, if you just sort of things, if you actually put your shoulders up and feel the tension, and then feel it, and then relax, so you understand what the relaxing bit feels like. Or if you stand on one leg, stand on your left leg, feel where the tension is, and stand on your right leg and feel where the tension is. Or
absolutely,
push your hips forward, or push them back, or bend your knees, or lock your knees.
Yes. Or clench your toes.
Clench your toes, exactly, clench your toes. And
there's that wonderful, isn't there, that sort of standing on 2 feet and leaning forwards and putting yourself off balance. And it's really, really, really scary. But, don't fall over and trying this at home. But if you do just sort of push your balance one way or the other, it's remarkably effective in helping you realize. I mean, I've got a lot of students who try and play the flute on one leg. I'm sure you've had over the years.
It's
I'm very sort of jealous, but yes.
Well, it's a little bit of Ian Anderson, Jethro Tull, isn't it?
Yeah.
He does it very, very well, I have to say. So, I don't think we can go down that route, really. But it
an
just
acquired skill,
tension, doesn't it? We're trying to release the tension, and sometimes some postural habits create tension. And then, as you said, that affects the breath, so you don't breathe as well or as deeply, and that affects your sound. So,
and a fantastic tool that we have, and I'm very lucky in my teaching room. In Wales, we all have these long windows. I don't mean windows, mirrors.
Mirrors, yeah.
And if you're not practicing in front of a mirror, do at some point, or sometimes it's the benefit of having these Zoom lessons that we've been able to watch ourselves on the screen so closely. Sometimes you're really not aware of I'm very lucky in my Pilates lessons that I've got a teacher who can come up behind me and point out those postural things. I think I'm standing straight, and then she sort of, prods me in the back, and then I go straight and think, that's straight. But we don't always know, and it is helpful to practice in front of a mirror and just check that everything looks sort of right.
You reminded me of a story. There's a very, very well known international bassoonist. This is quite a few years ago, and he was telling me a story that he was just sitting practicing, and he just caught sight of himself in the mirror and thought, right. "Oh heck, what am I doing?" And his posture had changed, and he just hadn't realized. I mean, it must have happened very sort of, sort of subconsciously, but he just caught sight of himself and then was able to adjust it. So mirrors is so important. And the other thing I was just thinking of is a sort of a vicious circle could be. If you think of a circle, that if you have poor posture, that can equal poor breathing, which equals poor tone. So if you can change that around into a good circle, that if you have good posture, you will breathe well and you will sound a lot better. So,
and release that depth of that breath, going back into our breathing idea, that we are trying to broaden, and that comes from a release all the way down our spine, because our ribs that are attached to our lungs, which are attached to it's like that old song, isn't it? The knee bone's connected to the thigh bone, etc.
Well, talking about songs, your number 5 is Sing a Story. What's that about?
So sing and tell a story. It's I've used a lot of songs over the years. I've arranged quite a few, as many people will know my Strauss songs that I've arranged. I like the fact that when you're a singer, you have the words, and it tells you so much about the emotional content of the song. If you're singing about a rainy day and you thought it was about a sunny day, you're getting so many clues from the words. So I suppose, having loved playing songs for that exact sort of shortcut, if you like, to what the emotion behind what I'm playing, I've introduced now. It's not always necessary, but if I'm just struggling with a little bit of phrasing, I might superimpose a text that will just help me to remember that that's where my phrase wants to go, or that I'm in a happy mood now rather than a sad mood. So it sort of sounds a little bit shortcutty, doesn't it, and a bit cheaty. But on the other hand, when it comes to it, we want to remember that we're communicating our music to an audience who maybe has never heard this piece before. And if we've got a really clear intention of what we're trying to say, I think that can sometimes relate across. It doesn't matter that our audience is not hearing you singing about what it is that you're thinking in your head, but it should relate to the music being really clear, the message coming across really clearly about what your intentions are when you're playing a piece of music.
Yeah, that's really good. I used to ask students just to go to the library and get out a songbook, just anything it's a similar thing where you're doing a little bit of sight reading, but you've got words there as well, and it really helps you connect with the emotion. When I was a student, there was a book we used a lot by Moyes called Tone Development Through Interpretation. I'm sure you use that as well. And indeed. I remember at one of the flute courses I went to, all the book was based on Moyes. Moyes started off in a choir. He loved choral music and opera, and he gathered all these beautiful melodies and put them in the book. And so at this flute course, all the original songs and choral works had just been, a little bit of them had been recorded, so you could hear the original.
Brilliant.
Before you played the actual tune in the book. And it was the first time that I could see a link between flute and singing. I was very young at the time when I first did this. Brilliant. But also the emotion behind whatever that song was, or whatever that bit of opera was. So we can all do that. And just get songbooks out.
Yes. And it's so easy now, isn't it, to use that book and to then look up all of the references, because we've got YouTube at our fingertips, which is such a brilliant. Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Now I want to go and dig that study book out and go and listen to all the songs. Fantastic.
We sound we sound like two old dears, Liz, talking about when
do we really, Claire?
It was so difficult because you couldn't didn't have computers, you couldn't Google this and that and the other, and now you just.
It's so true, though.
I know. You just say, Alexa, play me whatever.
Yes.
Oh, my Alexa just come on now.
Fantastic.
Right.
No, but it's okay, so variety. Oh yes, so you can tell I was thinking about this quite a while ago, and I'm just thinking, yes, so constantly creating colors with hairpins. Do you know, I think that's probably come from a particularly Baroque perspective. If you play your Bach flute sonatas and you open the page up, there's nothing, there's no hairpin on them. And I've done quite a lot of arranging of, for example, the Bach trio sonatas, which is an organ trio sonata. And in my arranging, it's not just putting the notes in the right key that works for us. I've also added all the dynamics and the contrasts. And I always feel a bit nervous about doing that because they're not Bachs. But on the other hand, if I don't put them in, I think there's a bit of a temptation to play music without creating colours. So I quite like to put in some hairpins, even if I change my mind about them. And certainly if you're using one of my arrangements, do feel free to change the hairpins. But put them in so that you've got a sense of direction and a sense of going back to that expressive use of air, so that you know where your air's going. And I think the other thing is, in part of your adding variety, think about changing your articulations. Again, I have to do that a lot on Baroque flute. We don't really have that many. I'm going to get into terrible trouble here. We don't really have that much in terms of dynamic contrast, because we have forked notes and unforked notes. This is getting a bit high tech. So in order to add variety on Baroque flute, we do a lot of different articulations. So we've got, soft legato tonguing, we've got hard legato tonguing, we've got all sorts of variety coming in on our articulation. And I sometimes think with modern flute, because we learn to go everything comes out a little bit the same. So I think, throwing in different articulations, different slurrings, different hairpins, just keep everything keep thinking about how you can add variety, because I think it is the spice of life.
It certainly is. Again, for the listeners, if you just take a phrase, a simple phrase, doesn't matter what it is, and think about putting hairpins in different places and see how the music changes. So that you could have a hairpin going through it. Say you had a 4-bar phrase, you could have a hairpin going through the whole of the 4-bar phrase. So you gradually build up volume to the end. Or you could reverse that. Or you could have a hairpin going to the middle of the phrase and then coming away at the end. And then you could just do think about different notes where you might have a hairpin then coming away, and just chop and change and see what the effect is. And then it's probably easier than when you get to your repertoire, will help you be a little bit more creative with that. So many people just play in this monotone, this monosyllabic manner. And I think Baroque music scares people. So it becomes more of a monotone because they daren't do anything. But, you can be creative with it.
Absolutely. And I think the fact that it's not written in, one should see that as a really liberating thing. We've been given in Baroque music the bare outline of what the composer wanted, because all of those printing things were, printing a hairpin was very laborious, had to go underneath notes which were printed in blocks. So, they just, the fact that they didn't put them in did not mean that the music just had to come out exactly the same. So, but see that as, oh, great, somebody hasn't told me what to do here. I can do whatever I want. And that should be more liberating rather than terrifying. But I agree, people are put off because it sort of looks dull on the page, doesn't it? Because there's not enough stuff there.
There's a couple of study books, the Damas 24 and the Carg Ellert Caprices, have no markings in. And doesn't mean you don't do anything. It means you get creative, you get your pencil out and you put your hairpins and your dynamics in.
Go for it. Yeah.
You have to go for it.
And the fact that, there are editions of studies where those hairpins are in. For example, if you're doing the Bohème Caprices and you're using, for example, the Chester edition, that's somebody's ideas of hairpins, and you go and get a different edition and they're not in there, they're different. So license to change your mind, number one, and number two, to change the editor's mind. If you're convinced by something, it'll be convincing. So don't worry about changing your mind on a hairpin and putting something else in.
Absolutely. And I mean, every performance could be different, because
I love that idea.
You don't have to stick to the same thing. I've got another quote for you. I've just found.
Brilliant.
This is from, which is pertinent to this conversation. It's by Roosevelt, the president of the USA in 1901. And he said, "In any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The next best thing is the wrong thing. And the worst thing you can do is nothing."
I love that.
So if you do nothing in your music, that's the worst thing.
That's the worst thing. Love
something.
that.
Do something.
Just do something.
Sorry, just a random quote that was just sitting.
No, I love that.
Okay.
So now I'm talking about subdividing. So I've worked quite a lot with a percussionist in the last couple of years, and I love the way that it's so simple. It's all about subdivision, guys. It's just that simple. So if you're seeing a crotchet, you've got to think quavers or semiquavers, and then it works. And the same with rests. Don't just sort of see a block of rest. If it's a minim rest, then think crotchets. If it's a crotchet rest, think quavers. If it's a quaver, think semiquavers. So constantly subdividing. And again, I find that really liberating. Once you've got that pulse coursing through you, everything starts to get twice as exciting. So I would speed up the subdivisions. I would be thinking at least semiquavers all the way through a piece, and just enjoy feeling that sort of ticka 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 ticka. It's like the heartbeat going through. But I'm amazed how long I've gone in music without seriously subdividing. So it's my new thing. There we go. New for 2022. Join me in my new quest for subdivision. Things fall into place so much more if you've got that sense of pulse coursing through you.
Yeah. And if you're going into contemporary music, if you're used to subdividing in our older music, then in contemporary music, it becomes so much easier when you have very complex time signatures. If you're used to subdividing, you know how to feel it. So it really helps you in more modern music as well. Brilliant.
Perfect. So dancing. I'm a Strictly complete nut, actually. I adore watching Strictly. I'm a useless dancer. Doesn't matter. I think if we can keep that life, that sense of not, it ties in with everything. It comes back into variety, and certainly singing your story comes into the dance as well, because I think you need to really, really feel your way through the bar and not have the same weight going through every single beat. So there are very few pieces that don't actually benefit from having a slightly different feel on the first beat to the second or the third or the fourth or the fifth, however many beats there are. And I think if you can dance your way through it visually or emotionally, you are going to create just that little bit more life going coursing through your music. So I would really recommend everybody just lilts and moves and just feels their music dancing a little bit.
Yeah, that's lovely. And you can dance to any piece of music. And sometimes those movements are more natural for people than thinking about it. So I absolutely agree with you to try and dance your way through things, except then when you get to performance. Because
yes,
we've got to keep a little bit stiller. So we don't want to be big movers when we play, but we're using the dance as an aid to help us feel. Because music is so much about to feel the mood, the emotion, the flow, the direction. And that's what it helps with.
And I think even if you're playing an incredibly slow moving piece, I've often found the shape that I need just by speeding it up and dancing my way through it. And obviously that's not how I'm going to play it in the concert, but it just helps so much to keep that sort of movement going in your mind.
Okay.
Okay, so the next one is a really strange one. I mean, I remember sitting in my daughter's cello lesson once and heard a cello teacher saying, you really need to listen. But what a strange thing to say to a little musician, that they need to listen. But then I thought, actually, do you know what? It is too obvious to say, and yet quite often I think even, today I might have just been practicing and not really listened. So I think it's worth saying as a top tip, don't forget to listen, really listen, and try and listen with either somebody else's ears, or indeed just very quickly record yourself and listen back. It's another one of our wonderful tools that'll make us feel old, Claire. But we have a phone. It has a wonderful ability just to quickly record ourselves. You can delete it afterwards, listen back, and I'll be amazed if you haven't not done that, but then really been amazed at what you've heard back and thought, oh, I didn't know I shaped it that way. So I think yes, number one, listen with your own ears as you're playing, and be critical, not to not so that you put your flute down and go, oh, I can't play anymore, but just that sort of have I actually got the sound that I'm wanting? Am I actually playing this with the intonation that I want, maybe, or the articulation that I want? And then just quickly check by recording yourself. I wouldn't say do it every time, but just don't forget that actually you do at some point in your practice need to really, really listen.
Yes, and I used to talk about constructive criticism, because it's no good giving yourself so many negatives. We all feel
really important.
Do better. We all live in a world, in terms of in music, that do that better. I wish I could do that again. So when you're listening, be constructive with your criticism, and also reward yourself. You can also say, "Wow, I did that really well." That's better.
Really important.
Really important. That went a lot better than I thought it was going to go. And if you're going to record a little bit more than just a fraction, that might be the time, maybe not to listen back immediately, but maybe to wait a day or two, so that it sort of settles, so you're not so negative or critical about it, that you give yourself a chance to say, okay, I like this, didn't like that so much, and then you can go back and practice those sections.
Yeah, really good advice. Really good.
Recording, obviously, it's such a good learning tool that we should all use it a little bit more often.
Yeah, I think so.
And we can all do it. Brilliant. Number 10.
So that brings me, my last one. So I don't know why it's number 10. I don't think there was any real sort of, there's no more importance to number 1 to number 10. But I was just thinking that it's really nice to memorize little chunks of your practice, because it also helps you then to think outside projecting to your music stand, which is what you're looking at. Because if you can take the music away, you can then start projecting outwards to, I used to practice and have a deaf person sitting on the chimney across the other side of, actually it was the canal in Holland, I remember very well playing. And it doesn't matter, what your imagery is, but try and play out and across and over to something. Now, clearly that's much harder to do if you're staring at your music, which is on your stand, which is only, a couple of inches away from your nose. So I think you need to be able to memorize, but not memorize in terms of, can I play this, whole 50-minute concerto without my music? This is really, really just tiny snippets. So, for those who go, I don't like to memorize it, I'm really not talking about, starting at the top and getting to the end of the piece from memory, just little chunks. And I think that really does help you just to focus on where you want your sound to be going to. And it's generally not as far as the music stand, but much further.
I love that thought of projecting over the canal somewhere else. I mean, if you have to look around you, if you've got pictures on the wall, if that helps you think of a scene where you can project, that's absolutely brilliant. Now, memory, that's an interesting one, because it doesn't matter if you go wrong, because it's really not important. My earliest memories of doing things from memory, when I was told has to be from memory now.
Yeah.
And it used to scare me to death.
Of course.
And it felt terrifying. It wasn't done in a nurturing way, in an encouraging way. It was done that if you don't do this, you're in deep trouble.
Oh, no, that's not good.
It is not good. I think if you do what you were just saying, that you do little chunks where you'll think about projecting and you're not just staring at the page, it's such a healthy way of playing your instrument. And it doesn't matter if you go wrong. And then you start to get confident about not only doing your little bit of memorization, but maybe also doing improvisation, where you're not worried about what it is you're playing. You're just sort of feeling it, enjoying it, projecting it. So
yeah, and I'd almost go as far as to say, it would be healthy to go wrong almost, because
yes.
I like the idea that you don't need to play exactly what's on the page. So as soon as you've gone in off the page, off the piece, as you like. Well, I mean, there's no difference then between improvisation, because you are changing what you're seeing on the page, and maybe what you're playing is better. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's just you're playing for enjoyment. And it's very interesting, isn't it, when I think about jazz musicians and how free and relaxed they look when they're playing, compared to a classical musician who's staring at a music stand and terrified that the notes aren't going to come out right. It's much more liberating and much more relaxing seeing jazz musicians, because they haven't got the music in front of them and they're using their ears and they're listening and they're playing what they want. Actually, I mean, it's jazz improvisation, and it's something I would say I can't do, Claire. But what I admire about them is that they have that complete relaxed enjoyment, or seemingly, and I'm sure they have, it, because they haven't got that sense of they mustn't go wrong. And we suffer a lot from the we mustn't go wrong. We must play exactly what's on that page in the right order at the right time, and that's quite terrifying, isn't it, sometimes?
Yeah.
So I'm not advocating that you don't play what's written on the page, but that you get what's written on the page to the point where you can just almost shut your eyes and play it without thinking about staring at it. Because if you're still staring at the dots, you are going to be terrified. I mean, we haven't touched on nerves, and that's a completely different subject. But from my perspective, if you know what's on that page, you're going to be a lot less terrified than if you're still staring at it, because that is terrifying.
It's brought back memories of when I first started the flute. I started the flute playing without music. I played Jethro Tull songs.
Wow.
And
Wonderful.
that just sort of inspired me. And then, of course, when you start formal learning, in those days, it went out the window. You just had your book, it was tune a day book one, and you worked with tune a day book one. And all that creative feel and the freedom of playing without music had disappeared. And then it wasn't till many years later when I went to college that suddenly, first year, this is from memory. And I've lost the skill because I felt that it was something terribly hard suddenly. So I really like the idea that everyone plays little bits from memory and improvises and becomes confident about looking away from what's on the music stand. Yep. Well, Liz, that's all absolutely fantastic. I've got dogs barking here, which I've got a house full of dogs at the moment, so I'm really sorry. Wonderful. That's coming through. Liz, that's been fantastic. Thank you so much. I love your 10 tips. I think I'm going to write those down and put them on our Talking Flutes page so people can read them. And we are going to get together at a later date, maybe just in a few weeks, and we'll talk more about flute tips. But we're going to continue doing some sections of food for thought. We are. And it's going to be a regular event through the podcast in 2022. And if there are any listeners who have some topics that you want us to talk about in terms of food for thought, then please do write in. We're at flutepodcasts@gmail.com. And we have a designated Facebook page called Talking Flutes. And we're also on Twitter and Instagram @Flute and @Clare Flute. So do write in, tell us what you think. Liz, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Claire.
We'll talk soon. Bye for now.
And Happy New Year to everyone.
Happy New Year to everyone. Bye-bye.
Talking Flutes and Talking Flutes Extra are podcast productions by the Trevor James Flute Company. For more information, visit trevorjamesflutes.com.